Dean Legge, Matt DeBary, another edition of Riding Home, another breaking news edition for the Dogs. Again this week, this has been a busy 9 days, Matt, but this time, Wake Forest graduate transfer, Jamie Newman is coming to play football at Georgia. We don't know who the starter will be in 2020, but with a year and a few games experience as starting quarterback, it sure does seem like Newman is either the one to watch or one of a couple to watch.
Yeah, this is huge. Georgia wanted to add another arm to go in with Carson Beck coming into the program. And, Jamie Newman's a guy who has experience. He is familiar with Georgia's offense already. He's got a big arm. He loves to push it down the field. So of all the quarterbacks in the transfer portal or, as it relates to a grad transfer, I think this is one of Georgia's best options. And I think they got a really good player who, took a team like Wake Forest to a winning record. And I know they lost in the bowl game, but, he had a really good year, put up some numbers, and he's a quarterback that Georgia hasn't seen since the likes of DJ Shockley. The kid can really run the ball. He's big. He's not going to outrun a lot of guys, but, he's going to be really, helpful to Georgia in short yardage situations and especially around the goal line.
Well, a couple of different things. First of all, you're talking about a black quarterback. Black quarterback at Georgia is, of course, going to be immediately compared to DJ Shockley because in society, I don't know why we do this, but this is what we do. But Jamie Newman ran for more than DJ did. I mean, Jamie Newman ran for more than 500 yards. That's about 48 yards a game. Shock didn't do that. I mean, Shock was deadly with his feet in a way maybe that this guy is not. But when you start talking about quarterbacks who run the football, at Georgia, so that would have been Shock, to some degree Aaron Murray, and then Quincy Carter. None of those guys ran it like this guy has. And none of them, Stetson Bennett, you want to let him run around? I wouldn't. But,
no.
I mean, he can definitely run. Same thing with Mathis and same thing with Beck. But this guy has done it before, and, we'll just see what happens.
Well, he's definitely a pass-first quarterback, as is every quarterback that comes through Athens. So he loves to throw the ball. He pushes it downfield. He threw it past 20 yards, I think, as much as any quarterback in the country. I think he was top 5 in percentage of throws down the field plus 20 yards or so. So he loves to push it down the field, but he is good in those spread formations, the RPOs, the zone reads. He's very, very familiar with that concept, and that was stuff that Coley ran with Fromm a lot last year, but Fromm isn't exactly mobile. He didn't keep the ball and kind of, take full potential of what this offense can do. And I think Jamie Newman is the guy who could really do that if used the right way.
Well, one problem that he had was that as the season went on, his play was not as good. In September, he really did have a good start to the season, almost 69% passing, 11 touchdowns with 3 interceptions. By the time November rolled around, he was only completing 54% of his passes, 6 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. When he had 2 interceptions or more, Wake Forest did not win the game. They didn't play a rough schedule. The ACC is not a good conference, period. I believe they lost to Louisville. That was a bad loss, what I would call a bad loss. Of course, we're dealing with Wake Forest here. I mean, we're not talking about a team that has expectations like Georgia, but they started the season with a 3-point win over Utah State. Jordan Love and Utah State, they came to North Carolina for that game. They beat Rice's brains in. The game that surprised me was a Friday night game against North Carolina where they beat Carolina at home. That was actually not a conference game. It would take me too long to explain that. And they take out Elon with a blowout, and then they would beat Boston College with a field goal. They lose to in a very tight game by 3 to Louisville, scoring 59 points. They lost. They take out Florida State by 2. They blow out NC State. And then the season fell apart with a loss to Virginia Tech by double digits, a 52-3 loss to Clemson. They beat Duke, and then they lost to Syracuse before losing to Michigan State in the bowl game. So as the season went on, they had a few losses, but he was their leading passer and rusher in the bowl game against Michigan State. He was their leading passer and rusher. He had 200. It's Duke. He had 284 yards and 144 rushing yards against Duke. Um, he was the leading passer and rusher against Boston College. At Georgia, he will not. It's going to be
He will
hard.
put up those numbers.
It's going to be hard for me to believe that he will have 100-yard games at Georgia. But generally speaking, he had 50-yard games or so running the ball, and Georgia hasn't had a quarterback do that in a long, long time, since the 80s. In fact, with the exception of Justin last year, I'm not sure a quarterback at Georgia has had more than one 50-yard rushing game in a season since the 1980s in 1 year. I'd have to go back and look at Shock's game by game, but I don't think that's happened. So I say all that to say this: you're talking about someone that's bringing a different element to this offense.
Yeah, I do think he played probably the best defenses, and Wake Forest played against their better opponents later in the year, and that's why the numbers kind of went off it. But he was the best player on the team. I think that's clear if you watch the film. He's got some receivers. He's got some talent there, but not as much as he'll have at Georgia. And I think towards the end of the year, he was, they were in contention for, a really big season, and he forced a lot of stuff. Obviously, going against Clemson's never fun for any quarterback, but Virginia Tech's not a bad team, and they kind of struggle towards the end of the year, but I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. But he will bring another element that Georgia hasn't seen at quarterback. Aaron Murray was mobile. Matt Stafford, I think he actually had a nice game running the football against Auburn in 06 specifically.
No question.
But Jamie does it better than those guys, and he's coming in here. He's used to running that system. He's used to carrying the football. He carried it a lot last year, especially in short yard situations and around the goal line.
Well, this is not a small guy.
No, he's not.
I mean, so I'm 6'5", about 240 to 250, probably more 250. But so he's 6'4", 230. He's not going to be galloping anywhere.
He doesn't look that big watching him, but that's big. What he's listed at.
If what he's listed at is reality, he's a bigger guy. I mean,
that's a big kid.
That's Carson's Beck. This guy and Carson Beck are not going to be so different from one another physically in terms of height and weight. I mean, Carson's not 230 pounds, but by his senior year, he might be. I mean, we don't know.
Well, I'll say this. I know Carson and his family really well throughout the recruiting process. Yeah, Carson's coming in to win this job. Right. It's not like, he's sitting back and knows Jamie Newman, who is obviously in Athens right now, if you're listening to this video, is going to come in and be there. Carson is going to fight for the job. He thinks that, he's one of the best quarterback on the current roster. So I think if you're a Georgia fan, you have to be excited. You have this dynamic guy coming in with experience who can help lead you, and you also have a promising young freshman right behind him to push him.
I think we're going to see multiple quarterbacks. I don't think there's any. I mean, that's hardly a stretch. But just to go back to the comparison with Shock, again, Shock was not 6'4", 200. I mean, this guy could play linebacker, 6'4", 230 pounds. I mean, that's a linebacker's size. Maybe
he pushes the pile. He's not going to dance around you. He's going to push you forward.
Here's the thing. When I said earlier that I didn't think there were that many quarterbacks that had 50-yard games, Shock had two, just barely, in 2005. He had a 51-yard game against
Boise,
against Tennessee, and an 85-yard running game against Boise. Now he had a 40-yard run against Boise. That's why he had the 50-yard game, obviously. But let me get back. Here's the critical difference between Shock and Jamie Newman. Okay, I mean, because people will say, well, this guy's the first sort of dual threat quarterback Georgia's had in a while. I don't know about that because, I mean, Aaron Murray could do a lot of things, and Mike Bobo said, you're staying in the pocket. We've seen you get your head knocked off against Tennessee for the last time in 2010, and that was
he got popped every time he took off.
But he really
every time.
Aaron was a tremendous athlete. People just don't, But anyway, back to this comparison. Only in 3 games in 2019 did Jamie Newman rush for fewer than 10 carries a game. Shock, he only had 10 carries or more twice that year. Okay, and they played 14 games that season. So these are different guys. Just because a person looks a particular way. Of course, I'm not talking about your comment earlier because Shock. I mean, DJ was labeled a dual threat guy before people actually watched him play.
Because
And
he was running around defenses as a 5-star in high school because he was the best athlete,
no
so he could run
question,
around everyone. But he was a pass-first guy, and so
no
was
question.
Jamie Newman. And I think he does fit this offense really well. He can air it out. He wants to air it out.
I mean,
But he can run and escape the pocket when he needs to.
we don't know what the future will be. We don't. But as it relates to Kirby and them, I mean, these guys are never without an answer, it seems like. And here we go again with them filling a need, as the season.
Quickly.
Yeah, I mean, Jake, I think he went back. I mean, it's pretty clear that Jake was very seriously considering his options. Did he go back and forth? We can't know. Our initial indication was that he was sticking around, but we never said he is sticking around. So it's hard to know with all these things. Kirby and them probably knew better. I mean, I would say almost certainly knew better than we did that Jake was probably leaving. I mean, they had probably been planning this for a year. And so this can't come as a surprise to Kirby and them, but it is. I mean, let's go through this one more time. I mean, these guys have had tremendous success over time with graduate transfers. Mo Smith, okay? Cameron Isliak, Demetrius Robertson. Those were 3 pickups 3 years in a row. Last year, Lawrence Cager, Eli Wolf.
2 contributors.
Well, they were starters.
Yeah.
I mean, Robertson was not a starter in 2018, but he played a ton. I mean, Cameron was a starter. Mo Smith was a captain.
Is that the reason they beat Auburn in 2016? That game always means something, no matter if the teams are good or bad, and he made the play for Georgia to win that game.
No doubt. I mean, maybe people would look at the Auburn rivalry differently right now if Georgia doesn't win that game in 16. Maybe Georgia doesn't have the confidence in the SEC championship game against Auburn if they don't win that game and they've lost 2 in a row to Auburn. I mean, who knows? But my point is that
transfers are important.
I mean, they always know what they're doing. They're always, recruiting. We can't know what the future will be, but this does get you. I mean, you've been posting on Dog Post. You're relatively optimistic about this. You say this gets them to Atlanta.
I do. I think a guy like Chase Bryce could win Georgia the East, but a guy like Jamie Newman, who I think is really good, and I think he could come in here and not skip a beat because he's used to this style of offense. I think this is a guy who could help you beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa earlier in the year and compete for another national championship. I think he could bring that type of impact if he continues to, obviously wins the job, which he's kind of expected to coming in. And if he gets, on the same page with Coley, I mean, the defense is there.
Yeah.
And I think if Jamie Newman is the quarterback of Georgia in 2020, then Georgia's going to average more points per game and yards per game than they did in the 2019 season. And again, with this defense, the weapons they have, the offensive line will take, maybe a small step backwards. We don't really know. We can just assume that. I do think this is a guy who Georgia can, maybe ride to another national championship, type of game if they just do their job on the field.
Well, I don't mean to. I mean, it's clear that Georgia has everything it needs, generally speaking, on the roster. I mean, the offensive line, I'm not as bearish as everybody else is. They've got guys for sure. The question is who will be your left tackle all of a sudden, and that can get figured out. But at quarterback, you're sitting there, you're looking at, hey, they got 3 as of the couple, 2 days ago or a day ago, they had 3 scholarship quarterbacks. Now they've got 4. And they've spaced them out again. They all have a senior, a junior, a redshirt freshman, and a true freshman. None of these guys are on top of each other. It also means that if Stetson wins the job, he has beaten out legitimate people. If Mathis wins the job, he has beaten out legitimate people. Same goes for Beck. Same goes for Newman. I mean, he has to be considered the favorite coming in right now because he has college football experience, the likes of which Beck and Mathis do not have, and the likes of which Bennett has never started.
Real quick, I got a question for you. Do you think this will be a 2006 scenario where you have Stafford, Blake Barnes, Joe Cox, and Tarashinsky, or do you think some guy's going to take hold of the reins and be the number one guy through the spring?
Well, first of all, Mark I love Mark Richt, but he made some mistakes along the way, and twice it was with quarterbacks.
No doubt.
They should have never goofed around with Matthew. They should have started him from essentially. They went back and forth on that one too much. I don't think I need to regurgitate 2015 and this disaster that was 2015.
That'll be another riding home.
They made a lot of mistakes in 2015, but I don't think Kirby Smart's going to get in that situation. We've seen this before. I mean, we've seen now Carson is not, doesn't have the hoopla that Jacob did. But we've seen a transfer guy that's there, a guy who's been in the program for a little bit that's there, and the new guy that's there. And whereas in 16, it was 3 guys who were really fighting for it, but you knew they were going to go with Jacob all the time. In 15, we had it should have been done completely different than it was done. I mean, again, that whole season was a disaster. In 6, I think that I don't think Kirby will allow it to be the way it was in 6. In 16, he proved that the way that they did it in 15 was never going to happen underneath his watch. I do think you go back and you look at the Alabama championship in 2015, and again, we're sitting here talking about national championships is absurd. But when you sit there and you look at the national championship in 2016, I believe the starting quarterback for Bama in their first game was not Jake Coker. Am I getting that wrong? Because he wound up being their starting quarterback over time. But that wasn't exact. I mean, I remember a time. I'm just going off memory here, and now I'm looking it up. No, Jake Coker definitely played a lot / started in that game. I don't know who the starter was. But there was a time when Jake and everybody else at Alabama was just scrambling like crazy to see who the starter was. That might have been a different year. But,
I think it was a little earlier. But
Coker? Yeah, no. I mean, Coker won the national championship with Alabama in 2015.
15, okay.
Did I say a different year?
I might have heard you wrong. But I do think Newman is a guy who could do the same thing at Georgia and kind of take the reins of this offense, which has a lot of potential, even though it will be kind of a newer offensive line. And again, the defense is there, but I think you've got to, if you're a Georgia fan, you have to like Jamie Newman as your quarterback going into Tuscaloosa instead of, a true freshman or a guy like Stetson Bennett.
And that's the question is, whoever starts that game has never seen that before. And, quite frankly, Mac Jones has never seen Georgia's defense before. That's gonna be a a star exploding in front of his eyes, even though he'll be at home. It will be a black hole for him. He's gonna have a hard time that day, Alabama wins or not. But
Michigan's defense was supposed to be great, and he did pretty well against them. But you're right. You're right.
Okay, but I mean, I can't remember how many people have held. We got plenty of time to talk about Georgia, Alabama. I mean, we got Georgia, Virginia before that. But with Newman coming in, now it sets up a 4-way fight. And no, I'm not dismissing Stetson. I'm just not going to. I'm sorry. So now we're going to see what all these guys got. Let's see what happens with the health of Mathis. But, you got Beck, Bennett, and now Newman. And you've got options, Matt. You've got options.
Yeah, there's no doubt. We want DeJuan Mathis to be healthy because right now he's all potential still. Yeah. He's still raw coming in. He's the guy who could probably get better quicker than everyone because there's still so much for him to learn and a lot of untapped potential there. But I know Carson's going to come in fighting, and I think next year could be the year where Carson takes over. I still think there's a good chance he's the future of this program, but a guy like Jamie Newman coming in just immediately bolts this offense, I think, and I think he'll be the guy, and I'm expecting him to have a good year under this Georgia offense and under James Coley, as crazy as that sounds.
Well, I don't know, and I'm not going to know for a while, and so maybe you should come to Dog Post and check out our tidbits, our Hansel and Gretel breadcrumbs leading us along the way, because we've got 9 months And my suspicion is they might not, Matt, name a starter before the Virginia game even.
This won't be the first time we talk about this
No.
quarterback race.
No,
So
hey, this duo has done this a few times on these quarterbacks. So stay tuned to Dog Post. Thanks for listening and subscribing. We're past 9,000 subscribers. We really appreciate that on YouTube. If you're listening on iTunes, I can't easily figure out the number over there, but I know we're well listened to there. So thanks to everyone. Make sure to click the subscribe. We're going to leave you another video right here at the top if you're on YouTube. Thanks for listening. Matt, thanks for joining me. We'll see y'all next time on Riding Home.